All right. We're going to talk about implementing Hyper-V. This is actually how to go through and actually configure it, the options for doing that. So I'm going to get into that. Notice down in the note, the core concepts apply to hypervisor products for Linux. So there are some other things, but the majority of the stuff is the same in both of these. Okay. As one of the questions in the last test, make sure that your hardware supports the VT AMD virtual extensions and SLAT before you install this Hyper-V, because it's not going to work if you don't have the right hardware. There are two generations in Hyper-V that you can use, Gen 1 and Gen 2, but still they both have to support this. So make sure you do that. Okay, there's some basic information in here that we talked about last chapter, that when you're creating a Hyper-V server, the information in the ISO file. So you might have to go in there and change some of that information after you actually have your server set up. But just know that you have to do that. Let's see, where's my mouse? Jeez, couldn't even get in this office this morning. The door was locked. It's been a great day so far. Okay, on 3.1 here, if you actually look at the adding a Hyper-V role within the server manager, under the roles, when you choose the server roles, here's your options that you have. So in this particular one, we're going to choose Hyper-V. Okay, and then we're going to choose how it's connected. And this shows you how to create an external virtual switch. Usually when you have a virtual machine, you're going to have multiple network connections. And we'll talk about that as we go along, but there's reasons behind doing that. You don't want all the traffic out on the regular network. It's just faster if you have a private virtual switch set up between the machines, so only those machines can talk. For live migration, to set a network up for that, you can actually move a running virtual machine from one server to another as long as it's on the same Active Directory. Basically, it's called source and target. But when you do that, the user has no idea that you're doing anything with the server at all. It's pretty unbelievable. I started a constant ping on it because I didn't believe that the users wouldn't be affected and wouldn't know it. And it only dropped one ping in the whole transfer. And it was pretty large files that it was moving. So I was impressed with it. Okay. With the virtual switch, this one we're actually going to do an Ethernet. So once you set this up, your virtual network cards are going to have a V in front of the Ethernet. So we're going to, because you are using Ethernet, it's going to have a Ethernet for the regular physical switch, physical NICs, network interface cards. And for the other NICs that you create, it's actually going to have a little V in front of the Ethernet. So you know it's the virtual one. Okay, for live migration, you're going to turn that on. And there's two options that it actually can use for security, for the authentication of allowing you to do the live migration, the Cred SSP or the Kuberos, which is the default in Active Directory. As long as you're logged on with an admin ID on the domain, and both machines are on the same domain, then that's all you need, but you need to configure it that way. And here's where you do that in figure 3.3. It's the options in the middle. You can use either one of those options. It depends on how your network is set up. So Okay. Then you're actually going to specify the location for the virtual machine configuration files. So you're going to have two options, one for the virtual hard drive and the other is for the virtual machine configuration files. And basically what you need to do before you start creating all these virtual machines is decide with everybody else going to be doing this, set up a place to put them all in the same place and use a standard place. Or if you're going to save them on the hard drive, like this one, which they don't recommend, then, just do the same thing every time so you know where to go look for it if you need it. Okay. Of course, Server Manager, you can do it. This note down here says, of course, you can install Hyper-V with the Windows Admin Console or with PowerShell. So either one of those, you can do that. Most people use the GUI because they have the options when they're setting this up. Okay, so once you've done that, your server XN35 has been created. So there's your new Hyper-V server that you've created. Okay, understanding virtual networks. Everybody understand what a switch, a WAP, and virtual switch, wireless network. That was one thing that was so hard for our clients to understand is they would ask for wireless. Well, okay, I'll install wireless. I have to have a cable pulled. And they're like, no, it's wireless. You don't have to have a cable. So when you're physically installing a wireless access point, it needs a connection back to a switch. That, for some reason, just doesn't make sense to them. But you can get a repeater that repeats the signal from a wireless access point. But it's not the same thing. It doesn't have the strength that the regular wireless access point does. And of course, the wireless access point, you're going to have to go in and configure that first. But basically, within this virtual network that you're going to create, you can have a physical switch and you can create virtual switches. So this actually is going to walk you through that. There's three kinds of virtual switches that you can use. You've got the external virtual switch. And basically that's, you can configure it with VLANs with multiple networks within one switch. So it looks like multiple individual physical switches when you do that. So your external virtual switch could actually be a physical switch or a virtual switch configured through software that's connected to the physical switch. Okay, you can have an internal virtual switch, and there's a diagram down here I'll show you in just a minute. It's basically a network which the VMs and host operating system only. And then you can have a private virtual switch that you can set up that network only for the virtual machines. Of course, each virtual machine that you have can have multiple network cards. If you look at this diagram 3.6, the internal virtual switch is the green, the private is the blue, and the virtual is the red. But if you notice that the server host and virtual machine 3 are both connected to that external virtual switch, okay, but the other two machines are not. The other two machines have connections between VM 2 and 3. Those are only connected to the private switch. So why do you think that network is created there for?
Is it to prevent, like, for just like security, to prevent like if you have stuff going on that you really want to make sure doesn't get onto your physical network?
It could be. You can also have that virtual private network for live migrating the machine from virtual machine 2 to 3, and you don't want that traffic out on one of the other networks. So when you're setting this up, of course, you want to think about what you're doing and your plan, your overall plan of what you're going to do. Okay. we're going to create a new switch within Hyper-V. So this is going to be an internal switch. So we're going to choose internal. Okay, you're going to name the switch. Make sure you name the switch that makes sense. So when you've named this, not just internal switch, internal virtual switch, you want to make sure it has virtual in the name, but you want to name it something that makes sense. So make sure you change that name. Here's where they're talking about the VLANs. Basically this switch, this virtual physical switch and the physical switch can be the same exact switch. Say you've got a 48 port switch and you break that up into 4 VLANs. So if the switches are talking on the network and you see traffic from the Windows server host, the physical switch down there, because it is configured for different VLANs, would think that the virtual machine is on a different switch, a different physical switch, just the way it's configured. Okay, when you choose an external switch, you're going to also choose the physical network interface card to associate the virtual NIC with. So just remember that. Right now we're doing the internal one. Okay, if you look in this diagram, the Ethernet, that's what I was talking about, your Ethernet. This is the physical Ethernet card, the one on the left. And the other two that are configured are virtual. So both of these are associated with a physical card. Okay, now the difference. We're going to configure this virtual network adapter. You're not going to turn on IP 4 and 6 with this because it's Hyper-V. You're using the Hyper-V virtual switch with it. So in the notes, you can also manage virtual switches with Windows PowerShell. There's basically what happens when you've got a physical network card that you have virtual connections to. The network card does single root IOV, just input output virtualization. And basically what that does is it creates separate communication channels for each VM. So it sort of looks like it's got its own card when it really doesn't. I don't think it's on the screen, but okay. So now we're going to create a new virtual machine. Okay. What do we need to do when we're going to create a new virtual machine? The first thing is planning. With every one of them, you have to know what it's going to be used for so you can specify how much memory and that kind of thing you're going to create when you set this machine up. So right now we're going to create, of course, it tells you before you begin, whatever the wizard. Okay, then we're going to create the new machine. Going to specify the name and the location. Okay, it's important in here when we're talking about when we're creating this new virtual machine, right here, we're choosing Gen 1 or Gen 2. You have to know which one you're going to use because this is an option that cannot be changed after you make this decision. So you need to know what virtual machine you're creating. Of course, Gen 1 is the older hardware. Gen 2 is the new hardware with guest OSs that that Gen 1 can also support, but that's the basic difference. Here's the information for Gen 1, the what Gen 1 operates. Notice it's 32-bit and Windows 7. Here's Gen 2, 64-bit, and Windows Server 2012 and later. Okay, we're going to use dynamic memory for this virtual machine. Okay, so when we use dynamic memory, basically the guest operating system utilization of memory, that's going to go up and down as it's actually being used. But note, dynamic memory should not be used if you're doing a nested virtual machine. So on this particular one, we're going to use it. Okay. So now we're going to create a virtual network connection. And this is where it creates the virtual hard drive. Okay. And on here, it's got the same location as the VM, but notice the name of it is the VHDX extension. Okay. Dynamically expanding the virtual hard disk. Do you remember what we called that? I think that was in module 1. What kind of provisioning was that?
I think that's thin provisioning.
Correct. Okay, here's where we're actually going to do the installation options. So you're going to tell it where the image file is. There's that ISO file. What are you doing? So make sure you know where your ISO file is. I can't imagine using PowerShell to do all these options and choose all these options. I mean, typing all that out. I would think that would be way too easy to make a mistake on it. Okay, we're going to configuring the virtual machine. So you're actually building the server at this point. So you're going to decide the hardware to install using the wizard. You can add hardware, you can add network interface cards, you can add iSCSI for storage or for sharing. So these are the options you need to choose. Fiber channel, if you have a fiber channel switch and a fiber channel network card. Usually use that for SAN, storage area network. Okay, also in here, you'll notice the firmware, you can actually change where it boots from. You can change the boot location from here. Security. Security boot is enabled by default with Gen 2 VMs. So this is where it protects the system from booting unauthorized operating systems. It uses that trusted platform module. And it also uses virtual machine keys. Memory, you can also change the memory that you allocate, or you can enable enable dynamic memory option. If you do
Seems like it happened again.
Yeah, she's not here anymore.
Is everybody back?
Oh, yes, ma'am. I think
Yes.
we're all here.
Don't know why that. It's going to be a Tuesday morning happening. Let's see how many people I have now. Did you guys have to restart Zoom or
No, I
reconnect?
didn't.
No, ma'am. I think we all
No.
just stayed in the
No.
call and just you dropped out.
Yep. It just
Well,
booted
that's
you out.
not fair. That is crazy. If I had it on the same screen I was actually looking at, maybe I would have thought maybe I clicked it by mistake, but I wasn't even looking at that screen. I just saw it disappear on the other screen. Okay. I'm looking at 319, not sure what you heard, what you didn't, but basically here's where we decide the hardware we're going to install.
I can't see the screen right now.
Oh, you can't see it again? Jeez. La, 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 la. Can you now?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I do not know what's going on with Zoom, but the whole thing, it didn't shut down, but it minimized itself. So that's sort of weird. Anyway, we're going to choose the hardware. And in the hardware, we can add any kind of hardware you want, any kind of thing that it actually sees, or you can add additional things that don't show up in this panel. Firmware, this is where you can go in and change the boot order and tell it to boot from anything. Security, you can add security settings. By default, the secure boot is enabled with the Generation 2 virtual machines. The security is the UEFI security settings that we talked about. It's basically the new BIOS settings. So basically that's just software to communicate between the operating system and the firmware. The secure boot also protects the system from booting unauthorized operating systems. Okay. Here's where it actually shows where you can change the boot order and the actual security settings that you can actually change. You can turn on this enabled trusted platform module. We talked about that in one of the modules already. Just basically to save the secure boot and virtual machine keys. It also has shielding, enable shielding. That basically encrypts the contents of the virtual hard disk file. and it uses BitLocker to encrypt the virtual hard drive. And it uses keys stored in the TPM up here. If you turn TPN on, you can encrypt the state and the virtual machine traffic if you want to. If you'll see, it's grayed out right here. You can change the amount of memory. I don't know if they show that in the next screen. Yeah, you can actually change the amount. Here's where you set the minimum and the maximum. On the, let's see, it's on this one, I think, sorry. Right here, this processor, by default, it is only one processor turned on, a single virtual processor by default. So you may be able to change that for the number of processors for your VM, depending on what your VM is going to be doing. Okay. Okay, this is resource control. This is pretty neat. With the resource control, you can put the percentage that you want to allow your virtual machine to actually use. You can also set the priority for the virtual machine. So the relative weights priority. So you have a lot of options with this wizard when you set this up. Of course, you can go back and change it later too. Okay, on the iSCSI controller, you have a hard drive and a virtual hard drive, shared drive settings, pass-through disk. Now on here, it has to be offline to set that up. So make sure let me see if I can find it. I know it's got it on here somewhere. That one's in use. You can also set on the network adapter, enable bandwidth management. Okay, here's your VLAN identification. When you set the machine up and you've got the switch configured to multiple VLANs, here's the number of the VLAN where you're going to set that up. Okay. This is the network where we're going to change the network settings on it if you want to do that. Okay. So you see how important this is. You can do teaming on it. We normally did teaming. Why would we do teaming? What does that do? What's that give us the options to do? It's to balance the network traffic or for fault tolerance. If something happens to it, then you've got another physical path that you've already got configured. You don't have to go back and do that. Okay. Okay, this is the generation 1 machine. So if we were configuring a generation 1 virtual machine, these are our options. So it's got the IDE controller. It's got COM1, COM2, diskette drive. So if you look at this, you know that the Gen 1 has been chosen by the options that show up in this window. Because by default, you've got 2 serial ports configured to use a named pipe. Like basically it's a file that represents a connection to a process is what that is. Oh, and also in your boot sequence, this one's got boot from CD, but you would also notice in the Gen 1 machine under that option that you will have a floppy drive option. Can't believe you got you would have a file that would be small enough to put on that for for booting your machine, unless you just tell it to boot the file somewhere else. Okay. Now that you got your virtual machine configured, this is going to go through working with the virtual machine. Before you boot your virtual machine you just created, you want to connect to it first, because in the actions pane on Hyper-V, you can actually watch that machine come up. So once you connect to it, then you tell it to boot. And the reason for that, so you can watch it post. There's buttons actually on the toolbar at the top of the window that you can actually use that simulate the Control-Alt-Delete. Because you can't use your keyboard to Control-Alt-Delete. That's going to shut down the machine you're on. So there's buttons on the window at the top that actually send a Control-Alt-Delete key to the machine. Okay, after you've told it to boot over here and connect under the figure 330, you've got the connect option in that action pane over there. And that's actually going to start that window. And once you do that, you can actually see the window. You can actually watch that machine boot up. Okay, managing Hyper-V features. The most used are checkpoints, live migrations, and replication. Checkpoints, basically, it's where you've got a file saved, basically, that if you're going to revert back to if you need it, sort of like a backup. So basically, before you're going to make any major changes, like operating system changes to the VM, create a checkpoint. And if you do that, it creates that .vhdx file. And then anything you make, any changes you make to the machine after the checkpoint, it's got an A in front of the vhdx file. So when you're looking at those files, you'll know. And you don't want to keep a whole bunch of these files. After you've created these checkpoints, you don't want to keep a whole bunch of them, because of course they're going to just fill your memory up. Okay, they've got a standard checkpoint, and basically the standard checkpoint, it uses Hyper-V, but it includes the running programs. So if you don't want to include the running programs that are in production, then you don't want to use that one. You've got a volume shadow copy service. That's the, it backs up open files. I was looking on here. I don't know how they expect us to read all this in the diagrams. They're not too big. Anyway, you've also got file system freeze, is what Linux uses. It backs up the open file. So if you're using Linux, also it'll do that too for the other version of Checkpoint. Okay. Okay, live migration is one of the other options on here that we can do. So if you're going to move the virtual machine configuration files and the virtual machine hard disk files are going to be moved from the source to the destination. So you can choose that option. I was trying to figure out where that is. Here we are. Okay. Or you can move the virtual machine's storage only the virtual hard disk files are moved in that option. So, of course, you have to think about what you're moving, time you're moving it. The user's not going to know, but it's still going to use resources because it uses a huge amount of bandwidth. You want to limit the number of virtual machines that you're going to live migrate across the network at the same time. You shouldn't do any more than 2. Okay, replication. Basically, you're going to copy a VM on a destination as a host, as a backup. So if you're going to replicate a virtual machine, you have a target. You must have replication enable wizard that are, it's going to ask you for the location and it's going to ask you for the frequency to do that. So it's going to use the Kerberos authentication that we talked about with Active Directory. So down here, you're going to actually specify the default location to store the replica files. So if you'll notice on all these that they've used the C drive to store all this information, which it tells us in the other not to, but this one did it anyway by every example, but change it. Okay. Rapid server deployment basically is exactly what it says. You can create a template, a VM template, and you can send rapid server deploy to hundreds of machines at the same time if you're planning on creating that many new servers. But basically, it's just you create the template, a standard template. Of course, the generation, it's got to be the same that you create your template on. And then you can actually go in after you've created this new machines and make the changes that are specific for that. You can use Windows deployment systems or services. Basically, it's just a role where you can do it on the network. Okay, the sysprep tool. Does anybody know what the sysprep tool is used for?
Nothing
Basically-
other than what it says in that little box.
Basically, it's a utility that allows you to remove the unique information from an operating system prior to the time that you duplicate it. So basically, that's what it does. And then when it boots, then this out-of-box experience wizard boot is part of the initial setup. Okay, so you run that sysprep tool. You're going to export the virtual machine, and then you're going to actually choose the template. So if you have multiple templates, make sure you name your templates for what they actually are. I know when you're first doing them, you're like, oh, we're only going to use them for this. Well, make them unique enough to where you understand. You don't have to figure it out or load the wrong one and start over again. We were 6 hours into creating some of these. And the guy we were training lost his place. We took a break, and we always use this. We wrote procedures for everything we did. They weren't like the nuclear procedures like everybody else used, but they were procedures for us. So we made sure we did all the steps of every one. So every one of our machines was, basic configuration. We had spent 6 hours by the time, because it was huge amount of memory that we set up. The ISO file was huge. And we're 6 hours into it because we were explaining a lot of the steps we were going along with this when he lost his place in the procedure because he wasn't using what we called circle slash method. Basically, if you're on this step, which is what, 3-2, then we would put a circle beside 3-2. And when we finished step 3-2 completely, we put a slash through it. So we knew where we were in the procedure. And we're 6 hours into it. Oh my goodness. One of my cohorts from McGuire, I thought he was going to come to Oconee and beat him up. He was so upset because basically we had to completely start over because he had no idea where he was in the procedure. So for me, it just makes it easy. You don't forget to do something. You don't forget to turn something on by default. It's one way and you need to change it. So you can do the screenshots just like this has the screenshots in it as part of your procedure. So, this is what it looks like kind of thing, but just do that. And, like I said, when you create your template, if you're going to use the same template for everything, that's fine. But if you're going to do one and you're going to set the memory for a file server for one thing and a print server for another, of course it would be, then create a separate template. It doesn't take that long to create these templates. Okay, so we got the template created. Now we're going to specify the folder where it goes. And this is what they called it, Windows Server 2019 template. So basically that was their general, we'll use that one for everything. Okay. So they chose that template from the folder. Okay. And this is where you're going to choose the import type. Okay. And of course you want to rename it. So you're going to rename it. Oh, this is the target path for the virtual machine files. Okay. Remember the two files, the configuration file, the checkpoint where you're going to store your checkpoint, and your paging folder, which this shows you the C drive, and it specifically told us earlier not to use the C drive for our paging folders. So, okay, and then the storage files. Okay, so this is what's going to start. This is the wizard. So it looks really similar to any wizard where it's going to boot the server. It's going to ask you the information. Okay, when you're going to use these Windows deployment services, these WIM files, these Windows imaging format files, you have to have the boot WIM and the install WIM, both. Those are the two required. Okay, the server OS is 2 large files, very large files. Okay, so just remember that. And of course, the boot makes it bootable and the install is the OS. Okay, you can use that Windows deployment service and set it up to where you have a server on the network that actually goes out and looks, depending on what kind of network card you have. But it could install the operating system on the network because you've got it set up for DHCP, and you can choose the option when the server boots if it's got the PXE NIC in it, and it'll use this with multicasting. So you can do a bunch of computers at one time. if you've got the computers or servers on the network, that you've got them set up that way. We did not use the across the network. Okay. In figure 3.5, here's where you go in, you set up your server roles, and you can set it up as a Windows deployment service. This is showing you how to do it. Okay, in that install file, there's going to be all of your versions for your operating system. So if you look here, that's why you see all these Windows options. Because in that install file that you had, that's one reason it's so large too, is because it has all these versions. Okay. So you'll need to choose which one you're going to install. Okay. And of course, you want Active Directory. If you're going to have it on the network for users, whatever, you're going to have to want it on the network. So you don't want a standalone server. Okay, this is just telling you where you want to put your WDS files. The DHCP option. And if your NIC has the PXE, what setting you want. Do not respond to any client computers, depending on how your network is set up and what the plan is for yours. Okay. This is where, of course, you're going to store that WIM file. And we're going to specify the name for the boot WIM image file. So you can rename it here. There's all the additions that you have options to choose from. And of course, that's why you only need one boot image, because all of those are options within that file. Okay. Any questions on this module? Okay, you guys can go ahead and start working on your labs if you want to. I'd really like to see how they work with class. Is anybody planning on doing the last lab 3.3?
You mean 3.3 or 3.4?
3.3, the last one that is a graded one. I was just going to try to break up the class to where everybody wasn't doing 3.1 at the same time.
I did already finish that one. I was having trouble with 3.2.
3.2?
Yeah.
What was it doing?
There's a point. Let me see if I can get back to that point. We're trying to connect to lab DCO2. Now, let me go back to it. Let me find that spot again.
Okay. And if anybody's already done 2 of the labs for this module, you're more than welcome to drop off. I just wanted to see if I know it has resource issues sometimes. with the labs. But the only other class that from Tri-County that is using this is my next class. So
I've already done 3-1 and 3-3. 3-2
Okay.
is the only one I haven't done.
well, you don't have to do 3-2 because you only have to do 2 of the 3.
Well, I still think it'd be good to get some hands
Yes.
on, whatever
Yeah.
hands on I can get.
Well, and you can do 3-4 if you want. I mean, if you think you're going to use this kind of stuff, then the resources are available. I like them because they're real world. You know, they really are a lot like what you would actually use. Now, this module networking for life stuff, not so much. That's just, and the reflection, those to me are just a waste of time.
Okay.
Busy
Well,
work stuff.
I'm still kind of trying to get myself into a job in this area, but I'm trying to learn whatever I can.
Hey,
I did also have trouble with the 3-4 practice.
the lab.
Yes. Like the first sequence where you're trying to type something in,
Uh-huh.
I made sure it was right. It would not take it. I may have to mess with that again.
Okay.
But on the other one, where I'm connecting the Win001 on the PLab DM01, let me tell you which section I'm in. I'm on page 4, test 2, step 8.
And what's it?
And I have to wait for WDS to come up
Huh?
after I'm going to connecting to 192.168.0.1. It takes forever. It took me over an hour before I decided to quit.
Wow. I wonder if they were having resource issues where it's, or they didn't have it out there. Let me unshare my screen a second because I know I know several people have already finished these labs, but it shows the grade. That's why I was going to go look at them. Okay. Yeah, they've already done 1, 2, and 3 and made 100 on them. But 3-4, I don't think anybody's done. Yeah, nobody's done 3-4.
Yeah, I'm still going to go back and try it.
Okay.
Just see if I can figure it out.
What time of the day were you doing it?
It was on Sunday in the afternoon.
Okay. And see, I wouldn't think that would be a busy time. It shouldn't be a resource time an issue at that time.
Usually Sundays is or the weekend's easier for me to get stuff done.
I understand. Just know that I'm not, even if for the modules and if you're working ahead, that I'm not going to ask you to do all of them. Like I said, you're more than welcome to do as many as you want to do. On 4, there's only 2. There's 3 parts to the Active Directory infrastructure. I basically wanted people exposed to it, so I only did part 1 is required, and lab 4-5, where you're administering the user and account groups, because that's something that if you are in this field, you will be working with for sure. And lab 5 also, there's 3 on there. I'm only going to have them do 2. So just know that, if you're working ahead and send me a note, that's fine. I know 8 doesn't have, I think it's 8. 6 only has 1 lab. 7's the one that's got so many labs. It's ridiculous. It's got 5, and I actually, instead of saying practice on the first one, I clicked too close and it hid it. and I changed it to show hidden, and it won't show it back. But I don't remember what one of the labs is. But there's another lab. I think it was lab 7-6. But even with I show hidden, it doesn't bring it back for some reason. But anyway, and then 8, of course, doesn't have any labs other than the networking for life stuff, which to me is a waste of time. Go to this website and read this and create this and write a 100-word document on it. Also on module 9, there's 3 labs required. So I'm only asking you to do 2 of those 3, but any of those that you want to do, yes, you're more than welcome to do, because like you said, and to me, the more you learn, the less you know. So, the more labs you do, you're going to find some other things that just aren't covered in this. Module 11, there's 2 labs.
So, module 8, there's nothing.
Nothing. There's no lab.
Okay. That would be super easy.
Yeah. Question about the lab. Did you by chance send anything to Cengage about the lab issue?
Funny thing is, when I clicked out of it, it was like, enter a survey. So I was like, entering the survey, like, yeah, I was waiting for
Yeah. You asked the wrong person.
You asked the wrong person at the wrong time.
Yep. Been there.
Oh, yeah. I was like, all right, that worked. All right. So I'll go ahead and see about giving that another try.
Okay. Good luck.
Thank you.